Welcome to Monday through Friday, cellular agriculture for a pandemic-free future. My name is George Ortega, and it is Thursday, July 16th, 2020 at 4:49 p.m. Okay, so let's start with a question. Let's imagine for a moment that we're a year and a half, 2 years away from today, and everything is in the new normal. You know, we no longer have to distance like we are now, and our economy is back the way it was. So we begin to consider a question. We kind of have this feeling we don't want something like this to ever happen again. So then the question becomes, how much, and the other part is like, we will have spent however much money it will take to repair our economy and get us to this new normal. So the question becomes, what percentage of the money we spent addressing this COVID-19 do we believe is prudent, is important to spend to give us the best chance, the best possibility of preventing future pandemics like the coronavirus? And when I was thinking about that question before, I'm wondering, well, I'm guessing that some people might say, what, 5% of what we spent, 10%? It's a difficult kind of an answer to come up with. But let's say, it seems like 5% seems reasonable. Okay, so going with that, let's turn to the theme of this series. As I've been saying, we'll continue to say, there are the best, the ideal way of preventing future pandemics is, it really actually doesn't cost anything. If we were much better people, collectively, our entire world, we would simply stop eating animals, stop farming animals. Because without the contact, between those farm animals and we humans, and then obviously between farm animals and animals like bats and rodents that are like the first stage in this contagious chain that leads to us. Without those farmed animals, we would be in a world that would be similar to a great extent, or to this, in this sense, to pre-agricultural society, pre-domestication of animals, where there was no livestock. There were hunter-gatherers, and actually maybe, because I got even like hunting, before that, perhaps there was a time when, like if we want to be religious, like before the flood, everybody was a vegan. I'm not sure if that's accurate scientifically, historically, but but the point is that like we could do that. In other words, like that represents our best protection against future pandemics, and it wouldn't cost us anything. Okay, but we have to be realistic. We have to ask ourselves, well, how willing would we here in the United States and everybody throughout every country of the world be to forego, meat, fish, eggs, milk, seafood. I mean, like, shellfish and all, whatever we eat now. I mean, how willing would we be to just completely change our diet? And I think, realistically, that would be a challenge that I'm not sure we as a species are morally evolved enough to meet. I mean, and I say this, I think very convincingly, in the sense that just the fact that we pay people to abuse and torture our farm animals just so we could have cheaper meat kind of demonstrates our limited morality. So, or limited control of our passions, our desires. So, all right, so that's the ideal way. And if this pandemic had occurred pre-2013, when Mark Post premiered the first hamburger patty completely created outside of an animal through cell cultured technology, cellular agriculture, then that, that would have been, perhaps very necessary. Yeah, I mean, that would have been our only option. Otherwise, we'd have to live in fear. So, I mean, there are two other options that we have now. The first is, like, now that we have this new technology, we're very, very fortunate to not have to make that choice between, carnism and veganism. So then we're at the point where, well, okay, we have this research, and 40, 50 startups trying to solve the research challenges, the research and development challenges, to scale up production, to go from growing, they can now grow, for example, beef, pork, chicken, duck, seafood. They can grow this in labs now, but in order to grow these products, these new food products, in sufficient quantities to feed the world, they have to solve certain, again, research challenges. And so then the question becomes, going back to our initial question, well, how much, the last part of this is, like, right now, it's a nascent field. It started in 2013, and there's about $1 billion invested in it. Putting all the investments of the 40 and 50 companies combined, it's about $1 billion. So then the question becomes, well, how much should we be spending? And the idea is, all right, if we continue researching with that level of investment, let's say, they go from 1 billion to a year or two, 2 billion or 3 billion. It may and probably would take 10 to 15 years to solve all these challenges and just, make this transition. We could get lucky, but for a lot of the products, it seems that would be a reasonable timetable. But, again, imagine if, rather than spending $1 billion or 2 or 3, we were to spend 50 billion, to bring many, many more researchers, biologists, engineers, these professionals to solve these problems. Because, like, again, one of the reasons these problems have not been solved yet, and there's a certain kind of like pace at which they're going, is because first, there aren't all that many researchers working on this. 40 to 50 startups, some of them only have, a handful of staff. Some of them have a bit more, but very few people on the planet. Some people they're beginning to work on it more, universities, basic research, but still, compared to so many other areas of research in the world, it's really an extremely limited supply of people, of resources going to this. So, scale up, $50 billion. Now, we started, suggesting, well, it seems like it would make sense to spend like 5%, of what we had to spend on this one to prevent all future ones, right? To give us our best chance. And our best chance really, if we get this right, when we get this right, because I think we will, we could probably be at least 95%, perhaps 99% safe of these pandemics. We just have to, like, again, if there's no contact, we may have to close zoos, things like that also, which, that's another kind of like form of animal abuse. But it's primarily the agriculture industry, the livestock industry. So if we do that, we can be very, very safe from future pandemics. So, if 5% seems a reasonable amount for that. Well, the $50 billion that I just suggested, compare that to what Forbes reported on June 2nd in an article, was an estimate by the Congressional Budget Office for how much they estimate will be spent by the United States alone to address this pandemic financially. And they, the figure they came up with was $8 trillion, okay? So what percentage of $8 trillion is $50 billion? It's not 5%, it's not 4%, it's not 3 or 2 or 1%, it's 1/2 of 1% of that expenditure. And I'm saying this because if you ask the average politician, if you demand as a citizen, listen, we need to spend, $50 billion now, not next year, not in 3 years, we need to spend this now so that when this distancing, this economic closing is finally lifted, when we're back to this, when we're at this new normal, whatever it'll be like, we don't have to live in fear of the next pandemic. So if you ask most politicians something like that, unfortunately, they are not the most virtuous people. Most of them are much more concerned with being reelected than with doing the right thing. And that's both parties, Democrats and Republicans here in the United States. But they respond. So if we as a population, as voters, as their constituents, demanded they do this, I think they would. They would see there would be such a, like just take, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, where people went out into the streets and all of a sudden, the Confederate statues came down. Policing here in New York City just lost $1 billion in funding. Major changes happened because of that, because people demanded it. So that's where we are now. We have to demand of our politicians that we invest this money as our best way of being free of future pandemics. Now, again, as I said yesterday, and as I found out recently, that's not our only, fortunately, means of defense against these future pandemics. Researchers are also working on a universal vaccine that would work on the subtypes of influenza A, which is the influenza, the flu virus that we need to be concerned with. You know, H1N1, H5N1, H3N1, there's different subtypes. And, you know, they're working on a vaccine that would work against them all, and not just work for a year or so, and then you have to do it again, but ideally for 10, 20 years. Now that may not, we may have to start with yearly vaccinations, you know, which, but that's the other major field. And this show isn't really so much about that, but I need to mention it because it's so important, because that's the second prong of attack against these viruses. And so, like, if it makes sense for us to be spending $50 billion immediately to fast track cellular agriculture so we can have these products throughout the world in 3-4 years, then it makes similar sense to also scale up the research on this vaccine. Now, I haven't done the research to determine how much is being invested in the universal vaccine, but I happened upon an article recently where the National Institutes of Health recently awarded about $150 million to a pharmaceutical company that I believe is in stage 3 trials of a prospective universal vaccine that may not be perfect. They still have to, but I think what I'm trying to say is, like, there may not be that much being spent on a universal vaccine. So instead of spending just $50 billion on cellular agriculture, we probably should be spending $50 additional billion on a vaccine. And all right, so that's where, you know, fine. We have challenges that we have to address now. You know, a lot of the states, you know, like the governor of Ohio, this Republican, I mean, the guy, he's completely clueless, completely irresponsible. He just, like, signed an executive order that prevents cities and towns and counties in Ohio from requiring masks in public. I mean, that's criminal. That for the governor to do that is criminal. And so we still have, you know, one of the challenges we have today is to stand up against things like that. So we're doing as much as we can, you know, so we're testing as much as we can. There was a news report yesterday where the doctors in certain places, because there's a lack of equipment, that the gowns that they wear and the masks and all, they're having to reuse these gowns that are supposed to just be a one-use gown. They're having to use them more than once. And then, in other words, between insufficient testing, insufficient equipment, you know, that's a serious problem we need to address. And yeah, that's something where Trump, you know, has been completely irresponsible. He could easily invoke the War Powers Act that requires certain industries, certain companies to start manufacturing these products so that we do have enough gowns and masks and tests and all. He refuses to do that. Maybe we need to, like, go out into the streets to demand that also. So what I'm trying to say, yes, we still need to do more to contain this virus, and so we'll be at this new normal sooner. But it would be so irresponsible to not begin the process of protecting ourselves from future pandemics now. You know, as I've mentioned before, these epidemics, these outbreaks, because initially what happens is, like, they start out as outbreaks. Like they notice that pigs, like, for example, in South Carolina, just several months ago, I think 30,000 pigs were killed because they found an outbreak of swine flu there. Okay, and this is not all that uncommon. So, like, they, you know, if an outbreak, you know, spreads to human, then, and the human spreads it like through the air travel that becomes, an epidemic and then a pandemic. So like, we want to prevent any and all of these, outbreaks to then prevent the epidemics and pandemics. And again, until a vaccine that under, business as usual may take 10 or 15 years to develop. Until that happens, and even if that did happen, again, these two strategies of ending the farming of animals, transitioning to cellular agriculture, and finding universal vaccine or semi-universal. There may be some vaccines that are just extremely effective, So we may do the same job, not just with one vaccine, but maybe with 3 or 4. But vaccinations, and then I guess there's the third area of research that we need to probably, maybe this could be another $50 billion, that once a person gets the illness, the flu, much better treatments to save lives. Now that's the least effective, because some of these viruses can kill within 24 hours. And sometimes you just can't get to people and give them the medication in time to save them. But so that's something we need to consider now. If we're going to be responsible and not risk a much worse pandemic. This coronavirus has a death mortality rate of about 2%. There's some viruses that have a mortality rate of 50%. We're very lucky in a certain sense. All right, well, that's the gist. That's the essence of what this show is about. Now, naturally, I'm going to go into many other aspects of this, the cruelty, why, from a religious, a spiritual perspective, what we're doing to those animals is so horrible that we kind of deserve this. From my perspective, I agree with Einstein and Freud and Darwin and Newton, our top 4 scientists, that we don't have a free will, that, this idea that we do is just mistaken. So I don't fundamentally blame us for this, but I do have the recognition that nonetheless, even though it's not fundamentally our fault that we're abusing or paying people to abuse these animals, God, nature does punish us to the extent we do. So, we have to address that aspect of it too. And I think, that we may be so successful in addressing that aspect that, perhaps it's possible to hope for this. Perhaps in a year or two, people will see, the devastation that's been caused, and people will be able to confront their role in it, people who are not vegans, and across the world, we have a moral reformation. We have a strengthening of our collective conscience, and it could be that in a year or two we just realize that we absolutely need to end the farming of animals and the eating of animals. That's a possibility. Again, like I started, suggesting that, well, we may not be morally evolved enough to do that, but punishment has as its intention heightened conscience, heightened awareness of morality. So maybe we have learned our lesson. And I think, because one good thing about this show is, like, as I present these ideas, day after day after day, Monday through Friday, week after week, new ideas will be coming to me. So like the nature of this message will change. Having just suggested that it is theoretically possible that within a year, we decide to just end the farming of animals and transition to, I mean, we don't even need, again, we don't need to wait the 3 or 4 or 5 years and spend the $50 billion to bring cellular culture, clean meat, cultured meat, you know, to market, you know, to replace the animal based meats we eat now with cell-based, with lab-based meats. You know, we could ideally, and I think I'm gonna begin to promote that message too. There's about 2% of us. I've been a vegan for about 15 years. And vegans will tell you, I mean, science will tell you that veganism is a much, much healthier diet than being an omnivore or carnivore. You know, a plant-based diet has been proven to be much healthier. And, you know, there's some studies that question that, but I would rank those studies with studies that question climate change. You know, there's the livestock industry, the dairy industry, they spend a lot of millions of dollars protecting their industry, protecting themselves. So I wouldn't doubt that they fund research that's intentionally misleading on this. All right, I've got about less than 2 minutes. So, okay. I will, you know, one thing I want to do next is I want to email an organization called Mercy for Animals, that they have a lot of photos of how these chickens and cows and pigs are treated on these farms. And what I'd like to do is start sharing my screen with photos of them so that you get a better understanding of how horrible we are, how evil we've been in paying people to keep those animals in those conditions. And I'll talk more in more detail, for example, with chicks, you know, so they don't peck each other, you know, and hurt each other as adults. They cut off their beaks, you know, the tips of their beaks without any anesthesia, you know, and they do the same for piglets. So they don't bite off each other's tails. They cut off their tails without anesthesia. I mean, that's just one of the many, many horrors of animal farming. And I think we need to get into this because, yeah, as I talk about it, I'm thinking that maybe, you know, maybe this coronavirus is our wake-up call to become much, much better people. And maybe it'll extend beyond the entire planet becoming vegan. Maybe we'll just like become better people, end global poverty, start addressing climate change. You know, I mean, strange things happen in our world. We've got Trump as our president. How strange is that? So the Trump, all right, I'm running out of time. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks, or next week. Thanks.